Hi, everybody. This is Adam Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology. It's May 31st, and I'm sitting down with my buddy Spencer today, Spencer Michaud, and we're going to talk about the astrology of June. There's a whole bunch of transits coming up this month. Some of the bigger transits of the month really coming in the next few months, with eclipse season also coming up. There's so much to talk about, and I really enjoyed a recent conversation, sort of interview that I did with Spencer, and so I thought it would be really fun to have Spencer join me and talk about the transits, since he's often journaling and furiously noting all sorts of interesting connections. And so I thought this would be a fun way to talk about the transits. Thanks for being here, Spencer.
Hey, thanks, Adam. I appreciate you having me. Furiously notating is a good way to describe it.
You have like beautiful handwriting too. Like every time I see your notes displayed, like someone has usually commented on your handwriting. So I will say that I've also really admired your handwriting.
Yeah, I spent most of the last couple of days, making detailed notes, like probably way too many.
Oh, that's good. I mean, I always tell people, when we're studying astrology, like when I was first studying astrology and starting to track transits, one of the things that I did quite frequently was I kept a lunar journal just about every day, and I would track the aspects from the moon to other planets and just see if I could notice any of the lunar, significations hitting the other planets, kind of syncing up, like, oh, moon opposed Mars, and like the waitress at the diner was like really pissed off at me, or seemed like she was in a bad mood, or moon was opposed to Mercury, and my internet went out, or just whatever might have been happening. And it was really effective. Like, it was a really amazing way to start learning astrology.
Oh, absolutely. You should see the margins of my journal. It looks like that scene in The Beautiful Mind where you've got all the little calculations going across his eyes. That's what the margins of my the paper of my journals look like, with all the transits and stuff. But you're right. It's a great way to track and to apply it to the events that are happening in your life. It's extremely useful if you're going back in time too, to be able to kind of learn from that experience. That's where it really becomes worth its weight in gold.
Absolutely. Well, should we dive in and talk about June's astrology?
Yeah.
All right, cool. So the first big transit that I have on my list this month is the new moon on June 3rd. What about you?
Yeah, that's my first thing.
Start there.
Yep.
All right, let me get it queued up here. I'm gonna kind of rewind the charts so we have them together. Yeah, there we go. So you can see them here. You should be able to see them. Spencer, can you see them together?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So here's the new moon. You can always tell the new moon because the sun and moon are conjoined at the same degree. A new moon starts the beginning of a lunar cycle. So every month it's an important thing to look at. It's in Gemini, right? And Mercury is in its home sign as this new moon in Gemini is happening, which is kind of auspicious, just because when a moon cycle has a good relationship at the outset to its host, it's kind of like we're going on a journey together, and I'm at the outfitters getting all of my gear, and the right guy is in the shop to help me get everything I need to start this adventure. So it seems auspicious that Mercury is there. But this new moon is also part of a pretty elaborate configuration. I mean, it's immediately activating a T-square to Jupiter and Neptune, and this T-square is going to be around all month. Like, I'll just run people through a few other dates. Like on the 9th and 10th, the sun will oppose Jupiter and square Neptune. Then on the 17th, the full moon, which we'll get to later, will activate this T-square again in Sagittarius. Then Venus in Gemini eventually will move through this T-square on the 22nd, 23rd, if I remember correctly. So this T-square all month long is getting activated by all of these planets in Gemini. The moon cycle itself is activating this T-square. A T-square, for those who don't know, is where you have a bunch of planets opposing one another, and then a focal point planet 90 degrees apart from either of the sides of the opposition, sort of squaring both. So we call it a T-square. In this case, the Jupiter-Neptune square is long-standing because they're both very slow-moving planets. So Jupiter and Neptune are squaring one another, and then getting, all of these oppositions from planets in Gemini, like all month long, from the beginning of this new moon on the 3rd all the way through, beyond the summer solstice on the 21st. So one of the major stories of the month is this T square. There's a lot to say about it. Maybe you want to start off saying anything about it, or the new moon in general.
Yeah, I mean, that really looks like the one of the main themes of the month, doesn't it? Like all of these planets are going to kind of take their turns going through the relationship with Neptune and Jupiter, and each of the I feel like all these planets going into Gemini is going to be, initiating new ideas, and those ideas are going to need to be tested against reality versus, the illusion or the dream. And, I'm seeing just that there's definitely a danger of like becoming too expansive too quickly with that. And so to me, that's one of the themes of the month is how do we implement our ideas in a way that is healthy and grounded.
Right. Yeah. I mean, like, for example, like Jupiter Neptune is typically associated with cultural and imaginative exploration and expansion. So when things happen that sort of take popular culture to a different place, oftentimes, for example, through film, like through films like Avatar and The Matrix. And, in film, there's often great sci-fi and fantasy that sort of really sort of broadens our mind. And takes us into a different galaxy or something like that. I believe Star Wars initially came out under one as well. But then you also have, these moments of like scandal, where, for example, one thing that has an association with Jupiter-Neptune contacts are steroid scandals in professional sports, where the desire to get big, like Jupiter, and there's some trickery, some deceit, some cheating, some illegal drug, and that's the Neptune kind of. And so you have like people like Mark McGuire, and I don't remember if Sammy Sosa was involved in that or not, but they were chasing that home run record in and Barry Bonds, right, in the 90s, and there was this whole sort of doping scandal that emerged, or like Lance Armstrong, or was it? No, not Lance Armstrong. Is that the biker?
Yeah, he was the Tour de France biker that was doing like blood doping or something like that. And he won like 7 Tour de France's and then got caught cheating and fell from grace, basically. I mean, I think this Neptune Jupiter thing, that's a really great example, because you've got someone using some kind of illicit substance to get bigger, to expand. To become stronger and more,
And it can go for other things too, like someone trying to sell you something that you don't need, or that is too much, or that you're getting this big imaginative idea, like I'm going to I'd like to live in a castle, or whatever the case might be. And I think you're right, though, that back to the Gemini new moon, scrutiny, questions, doubt, careful thinking, that those are the mercurial functions that come in and question and add this kind of dynamic oppositional tension. Because even though Jupiter and Neptune are square, with Neptune in Jupiter's sign, they're more like a pair, right? And the real sort of tense oppositional energies coming from Mercury ruled Gemini.
Well, and the tension comes from questions of scale. Mercury is concerned with the minutiae, whereas, Jupiter, the grand vision and connecting and confirming. So you've got all this destabilizing influence in Gemini that wants to contest things, ask the questions. And Jupiter's like, I don't want all these questions, right? It's kind of like, I want the answer. And
that's right.
I want the bridge to be built. And there, we talk about in your class, the oppositions being the nature of Saturn. So there's a constrictive influence. There's a kind of a no that's happening on some level.
Right. It's ideal, except,
right.
It has that like, it's ideal, it's perfect, except but this one thing. And then all of a sudden it's like polarized. And, and then the thing that I was talking about yesterday when I talked about, the day before, I talked about oppositions. And I think one of the things that's important with the oppositional tension of this T-square all month long is like, some things are ideal and there's a but, there's a qualifying concern. And yet that doesn't mean that you have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. It doesn't mean that the dream has to crumble, or that your vision has to be thrown out. I think sometimes there's this false dichotomy there, and maybe this month is going to be in some ways be about learning to hold the tension of our doubts or worries, or those kind of wrinkles in the plans that might come up, and rather than throwing everything out, just say, oh, this wrinkle might actually be a pathway into further elaborating or defining more carefully the dream or vision.
I think that's a good segue to like one little piece I wanted to add here. You're talking about the doubts and the worries. In the Thema Mundi, Gemini is associated with the 12th house. And I made a little video on this, kind of a theory of mine. This isn't like...
Well, let me before you go into it, let me just change the wheels so that we can put Cancer in the first place. Right. And then we can see Gemini in the 12th. Let me clear these. Okay, so this is what the Thema Mundi would look like if you were laying it out. This is this ancient classical chart that is sort of the chart of the cosmos in ancient astrology, and Cancer's on the ascendant. So you were just saying, in this ideal ancient chart, Gemini's in the 12th.
That's right. And there are some decanic associations with each 10-degree section of each zodiac sign that are associated with the tarot card. And one of the things I started to notice when I was studying that, I was reading some of Austin Coppock's work and whatnot, was some of the associations with the Thema Mundi and the quality of that house. So for example, the Gemini cards are swords. And in the first decan of Gemini, actually the second decan here, we have this card here. I don't know, for those of you who see it, I'm holding it up. It's a person who's lying awake at night, obviously having a nightmare or something like that.
Show it to us one more time.
Yeah, and so I just thought this was really fascinating because this is associated with the 12th house of bad daimon or bad spirit, which was thought to be some kind of, kind of like conscience on your shoulder or voices in your head that are guiding you off the path. And this really speaks to, I think, the quality of perhaps having too many choices, too many decisions, too much anxiety surrounding which direction you want to go in life. I thought that was really cool. And it's going to be opposing Jupiter in Sagittarius, in the third decan of Sagittarius, which is associated with this card here, the 10 of Wands, which shows a man carrying a burden. He's carrying the action burden out in the world. So it's more about associations with the 6th house, which was associated with bad 2K or fortune, right? Which is about the actions that we have to take out in the world. So to me, the main theme of this new moon is, how are you going to reconcile the inner with the outer, and the action that you take based on the ideas that you have? And I feel like with Gemini, of course, they want to scatter those seeds in many different directions. And I think many seeds will be planted. I think the issue is which ones of those are going to bear fruit? Which ones are you willing to nurture to full fruition? How can you do it without getting overwhelmed with the scale of it? There's an example of this. I had this idea about creating a game for teaching ancient astrology. And it turned into this thing. I'm like, all right, I'm going to make 84 cards. I'm going to do all these illustrations. I'm going to make this huge, gigantic, like Dungeons and Dragons style game. I'd
like to play that.
With like a million rules, which I think it could be cool. But at the same time, I'm like, oh my God, this is going to take me forever. And the scale would be overwhelming. So I'd have to figure out how to pare that down into a way to make it fun, be able to be absorbed into reality by students or anybody who wants to play something like that.
Right.
You can see already the tension between a good idea and how do we implement it without creating too much of a physical burden for us. Right.
Yeah. And the other thing that came to my mind when first of all, if there was ever to be an ancient astrology game, it would have to include the word dungeon in it, I think. So, So anyway, but going back to what you were, the two cards that you pulled, the decanic associations of the last decan of Jupiter's in the last decan of Sagittarius, Mercury's in the last decan of Gemini. They're opposing, and a big part of the T-square of the month.
I'll show you the decan associated with the last decan. of Gemini too, because it's a little bit different.
Oh wait, no, it was a second decan with the new moon.
With the
With the
new
new moon. Yeah, right. Well, the thing that came to my mind was it was 9 of Wands, wasn't it?
10 of Wands for
10 of
the
Wands.
Jupiter, yeah.
At 10 of Wands. So this idea of completion, of trying to complete
This is
something.
Mercury.
And the of course, and that's the third decan of Gemini. Yeah, of course, that's completion as well. So the fear, here's what I was picking up, and that the last card makes sense as well. Maybe we'll come back to that in a second. But what I'm picking up on this new moon is, like with those two cards, is, you know, I want to complete something. That's very Jupiterian, by the way, with a new moon that's opposing Jupiter and a full moon that's going to be right around Jupiter. It's this idea of victory, you know, like completing something, being successful, you know, confirmation and success. Those are Jupiterian things. And the 10 of Wands is like the labor of like, oh, I'm just like, I'm you know, trudging across the finish line. Makes a lot of sense when you think about Mars opposite Pluto and Saturn in the background of all of this.
Yeah, that's the other, that's the elephant in the room, isn't it?
Right.
We're talking about, you know, the interaction between the Venus and Mercury and Jupiter, and that's like kind of fluffy compared to this. Like, I guess I wanted my lady wanted to compare it to the Tough Mudder, the aspect of those. Are you familiar with that?
No.
It's like a triathlon, but it's like the most torturous triathlon you can go through, where they like, you know, electrocute you with a cattle prod and you like go under barbed wire.
Yeah, exactly.
You during it, or
yeah, exactly. There's this feeling of like, oh, I'm trying to finish something. I'm trying to get through with something. It's like there's a burden, there's victory in sight. Yeah. But I think the other thing that plays out with the Gemini and Mercury opposition is this idea of like, well, you know, when you're working really hard on something, there's a lot at stake and you really want to get it done. You can also you can stay up, you can lose sleep over it is my point. You can lose sleep over it and you can overanalyze. And like right now, for example, there's some pretty big things happening in our life through our yoga studio. We're sort of changing some of the way that we're doing business at the yoga studio. And also I have a program coming up, and, you know, so there's all this pressure to get all this stuff done. And I can see the end in sight, you know, like June will go by and eventually, like, you know, I'll be leaving town to go to another astrology conference and this stress will be behind me. But I can feel it, like I'm losing sleep. I'm staying up late. I'm, you know, kind of, and then I come back to like, yeah, it's almost going to be done. It'll be so nice when it's done. So I think that back and forth between also just mental anguish over something that should be joyous and good that you probably are going to accomplish, but you may be more anxious about it than you need to be. That could be a way of looking at it as well.
Well, when you asked me to do this, I had trouble sleeping 2 nights before. So I was this guy. I was like, oh man, it's a test.
Yeah. And then the of course, in the last decan, looking at Mercury in the last decan of the last 10-degree segment of Gemini, and the tarot card that's been associated with that was the 10 of Swords, wasn't it?
Yes, and which was called Ruin.
Ruin.
Yeah, and so, you know, this is kind of the person who can no longer bear the burden. You know, like if you really contrast it with this card, you know, they've allowed their fears to, you know, eliminate them. Although you can see that there is like a little bit of a hand signal going from the person on the ground, like,
like I'm here.
He's like, I'm all right, you know, I'm gonna be all right.
You know, that dichotomy is also interesting because you're looking at these T-squares all month long and you're thinking, you know, the worries that I have that are keeping me up at night, are they even real? Are they even that important? Right. The amount that I'm calculating and planning, trying to get things done, trying to move a vision forward, you know, am I just wasting energy because I'm anxious? And also the fear of ruin in the 10 of Swords. I think of that card. I often think of like, you know, just the anticipation of a bad ending. But whereas Jupiter opposing is like, no, we'll work through this. Victory, it's coming. We just gotta push, you know? And so that tension also of like defeatism, and on the other hand, being overly idealistic and even opportunistic, or kind of, you know, assuming that things will go better than they should because we're not being careful enough. Those tensions feel really acute this month with this moon cycle, and I think they're represented in those cards too.
Well, I wanna add in there, and we'll get to this when we talk about the full moon. But in Austin's book 36 Faces, he calls the second decan of Gemini the hermaphrodite, where we're trying to balance opposites and hold duality. And in the third decan, he calls that one the executioner's sword. So you basically have to eliminate one of the options to bring things back into unity and balance. So to me, this is like a weeding out of like process where, you know, we may get anxiety about all these things, but ultimately we have to make a decision and make a choice as we come to the solstice and a very peak point within the year.
Right. Yeah, that's really nice. The idea of coming to a decision, or, you know, that this tension may also mount in terms of like needing to make a choice, or sort of maybe even you could think about it a little bit more abstractly in terms of like defining our principles, or defining a vision or mission statement, defining a sense of direction.
Yeah.
Well, let's move forward a little bit into.
I have two more little tiny things to add on that.
Okay, good.
Very quickly. So this new moon will be conjunct the fixed star Tabit, which is kind of an obscure one.
What is it called?
Tabit.
Tabit.
Yeah, Tabit, which was associated with prosperity in trade and by voyages abroad. It was one of the stars in Orion's lion skin shield. There's also a danger of treachery or poison or inconstancy associated with this fixed star.
Interesting.
So that's bringing in some of those Neptunian themes, I think, as well. And Mercury was, you know, associated with commerce. So this may be a new time to start some sort of commerce type of thing, like you're putting out things for your classes and things like that. One other little side note is there is a Sabian symbol associated with this called for Gemini 13.
Oh boy.
See, we're going outside the comfort zone now. The moon is conjunct Uranus today, Adam, in your first. So
I can't help it.
Got to go with it. And this says a famous pianist giving a concert performance, or a great musician at his piano. And I think that really speaks a lot to the opposition between these two signs as well, because each finger has to become its own dexterous type of element that is trying to keep together the unity of the whole of the piece, the essence of the delivery of that musical vision. So there's things that are, you know, you have a bass line and then you have a melody going, and they seem like they're, you know, at odds, but they're actually working to unify for that piece.
Okay.
I thought that was really kind of a neat connection.
For people who don't know, the Sabian symbols are basically, they are a channeled set of images, one for each degree of the zodiac, that were received in this very kind of interesting random way by a medium. I believe it was in like Central Park or something like that.
Yeah.
And this was what, in the 40s or 50s or something?
Yeah, early 20th century, I think.
And so they've become really famous as these kind of divinatory images associated with the degrees of the zodiac. I am intensely skeptical about them, but that's just because I'm skeptical about all woo in general, even though I'm an astrologer.
And by wheels.
And I have lots of things that I'm very grumpy about in astrology, including
asteroids.
But that's neither here nor there, because there are ways of using them that are appropriate and ways that are probably more.
Can you tell that Adam and I have spent a lot of time together in the last year?
Yeah, exactly. So, okay, so that's really interesting, though. I especially appreciate the fixed star. Fixed stars are really, they're very old. People using fixed stars and their meanings date back thousands of years, and maybe represents the earliest form of astrological woo. So
absolutely. We're playing to the crowd with all of this today.
So let's go forward. Like, one thing that's going to happen, you know, Mercury's changing signs pretty quickly. Right. But I do like that, you know, June 4th into the 5th, Mercury is going to enter Cancer. That changes things dramatically with Mercury now entering the sign of the moon. You're going to have sort of mental, rational faculties, communicative faculties. Even if you want to say something like, you know, every month, wherever Hermes is located, that's where information is streaming in. That's where, you know, messages are coming. When it goes into the sign of the moon, it's going to be, it's more nocturnal, it's more dreamlike, it's more reflective, it's more emotional in the sign of Cancer, you could say, more romantic, nostalgic. My memory, I have Mercury in Cancer, and I have a pretty good memory, natally, I mean. And whenever Mercury goes back into Cancer, I find that my memory is very fluid, and I start having all of these sort of nostalgic, almost like poetic rememberings. So anyway, that's a few things that came to my mind about Mercury entering Cancer. And you'll have to watch, because as long as Mercury's in Cancer, it's being hosted by the moon. So even though it's like, oh, Mercury's in Cancer, should be emotional. Yeah, well, wait until it's in Sagittarius. When it's in Sagittarius, even though Mercury's in Cancer, your mood will become more fiery. It'll become more sort of Jupiterian or competitive or, centaur-like. So you really have to follow the moon as Mercury's in Cancer. And I think it's one of the best ways to actually track the subtleties of a planet host dynamic, because Mercury is very up to the minute. It's a planet that you can also track like the moon in terms of the aspects it makes. And watching the moon move through signs and qualify the kinds of thoughts and information and communication exchanges that you're having, it's really actually pretty fun. So those are a few thoughts that I had about Mercury entering Cancer on June 4th, June 5th. What about you? Anything there?
Yeah. I also have Mercury in Cancer in my natal chart, so I'm familiar with this guy. I would say that one of the challenges with Mercury in Cancer is it's kind of like singing underwater. It's like a thick layer of emotion that these thoughts have to go through to get out of your mouth. And I don't know about you, but if I'm feeling upset about something, everything starts to shut down and clam up a little bit.
Yeah, that's a Mercury. Well, we're both Cancer suns with Mercury and Cancer,
so I think that's one of the dangers, with that ingress, is if you're starting to get too worked up about something, communication could start to shut down and you could become distant. I would say that, if Mercury is at the disposal, or if the moon is offering up significations at the disposal of Mercury, that may also temporarily destabilize or have some contesting within the family, because there's kind of there may be a renegotiation of your family contracts or a division of household labor type of thing, and this is especially true because it's going to be co-present with Mars there.
Right.
In the first couple days, Mercury will be what's called Peregrine as well, which means it's kind of wandering without dignity. So there may be a few days of confusion, I think, when it first makes its appearance. There's a nice window, though, from the 8th to the 16th, where Mercury has a little bit better dignity. It's going to be going through, it's going to have dignity by its decan, by face, and then it's going to be in its own bounds from the 12th to the 16th, which basically means it kind of gets to set the agenda it makes the rules, so to speak, like the curriculum. The other thing we should talk about just a little bit is Mercury is making its appearance as an evening star on June 5th,
right.
Which I think is that to me has coincided with pretty important revelations.
Right. You can see this, like, for example, like I'll just show people how this works right here. So you can see, here's the sun setting in the west, right? So sun, like, kind of consider this as like the western horizon. And you can see Mercury, once it's about 15 degrees or so away from the sun, it will start to appear either in the morning or the evening, depending on if it's in direct motion or if it's gone through its retrograde. So here, what Spencer's saying is that, Mercury is going to start emerging as the evening star. And right as it makes that appearance, it's not, because Mercury is kind of emerging from the underworld, so to speak, from under the beams of the sun. New information can appear, new thoughts, you get an email from someone, or there's some new idea that even surfaces. So anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah, it's a revelation. A lot of the times when we have planets that are under the beams of the sun, things are going on in secret. They're hidden. So things may come to light when that planet makes an appearance. I guess the other thing that's happening when Mercury makes its appearance as an evening star is Venus is going to be conjunct the fixed star Algol, which is said to be, which is the head of Medusa, and one of the most malefic fixed stars, one that was kind of the the big baddie in the sky.
Right.
So perhaps there's some sort of information that's revealed that creates some tension within relationships or Venus-related things. And I think it's important to, quote unquote, not lose your head over it, because Medusa lost her head. You know, and I think that, you know, if there's a family issue or whatnot that comes to light, taking some time to really think about it and not, you know, pop off, I guess, would be important around this time.
Yeah, and I mean, you can see this from the fact that as on that day, you know, June 5th coming up, the moon will be moving through Cancer on that day and hitting, excuse me, the conjunction to Mars and also making oppositions to Saturn and Pluto.
Right.
So the moon is also telling us like this day is probably going to be somewhat dramatic.
Yeah.
Right.
So
yeah, right. Right around June 5th. If you're in East Coast time, it'll be in the evening. West Coast time will be more like afternoon. But unfortunately, this is also, I hate to say it, but this is the kind of, first of all, you could see disclosure or revelation of facts or information that's been hidden, that's scandalous, something like that. But this would also be a time where people lose their head, and in a sort of more public and demonstrative way. And the reason for that is that the moon also rules the city, right? Just the populace. Public. It's the family, but it's the public, right? Yeah, exactly. So yeah, so then you're thinking, you know, like, and unfortunately, like, I hate to say this, but like all month long with Mars in the moon's sign, the potential for it, like, it, you know, that kind of, you think of the moon serving Mars. Mars wants to cut. Mars wants to divide. Well, what is it going to cut or divide? You think of the moon and you think of like, okay, well, there's an umbilical cord. That's a positive example of a cutting. But you also think about like all the stuff that's happening right now with like the bans on abortion, or you think about questions about the rights of a woman's body, or activism around women's rights. But also, you know, there was a pregnant woman that was killed going to get some kind of children's clothing off of Facebook Marketplace. That was right as Mars moved into Cancer. So, you know, Mars will challenge and sometimes cut or sever deeply held emotional bonds. And it can also bring some degree of violence into places that are public. So I at this point, you know, I feel like if we had started doing this kind of astrology, you know, 20 years ago, it would probably have been more shocking to make a prediction about public violence. Now it's like, well, you know, there's one every week or whatever. So unfortunately, though, this is part of the month. So as we're talking about this Mercury appearing and Venus on ALGOL, these are also sort of holographic themes that are repeating themselves through the slow burn and build of Mars opposite Pluto and Saturn.
Well, I think it's, you know, I like the way that they speak about it in Project Hindsight too, where the planet has that abstract nature. Mars is going to be trying to sever and cut and burn and separate. And it's concretizing its events through the sign. So it's basically, you know, through being given the substance of the moon or of Cancer, or, you know, like mother issues, family, like the public. All of those things are being served up to Mars to act upon, so to speak. Or it's like the birth channel. Cancer's the birth channel for Mars to birth concrete events through. I really, that's been a real game changer in the way I've been thinking about all of these planetary placements and what they mean within the transit and within a chart.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's move on to, we've got so many more on our list. Venus is entering Gemini as well on, let's see, I think I've got it at June 9th. Yeah, it's about then. Venus will enter Gemini. What do you got for Venus and Gemini in general?
Well, we've got the first deck. I'll just show you the other card. The first decan of Gemini is the Eight of Swords. And this is kind of about some of the boundaries that we are mental limitations that we may have that may not actually be mental limitations, so to speak. You know, if you look at the card, you know, the bounds are kind of like loosely tied. And if she realized that she was able to, you know, create freedom from what is binding her, she may not have as bad of an experience. So this may speak to like seeing things in relationships as restrictions that might not actually be restrictions, and learning to become more flexible within them. There's a flexibility that comes in when planets move into, cadent signs that are transitions between seasons. So there may be some transition phases that are coming up with Venus. Mercury is going to also be in mutual reception with the moon for about 3 days, starting on the 8th to the 10th. So Mercury's getting some help from the moon in Virgo, and that may be affecting how Venus is being provided for.
Exactly. Yeah, I really see the ingress in terms of that Mercury Moon mutual reception. You think of Venus also entering that T square, going back to some of those same themes. Here's the dream, but how do I do it? Or here's the effort I'm trying to make to some grand conclusion, some happy ending, but I'm sort of mentally being tortured by it, or it's keeping me up at night. I think Venus wants to bring harmony. So Mars wants to cut, Venus wants to bring things together, to unite things. So if Venus wants to harmonize, and the Mercury is going to provide for it, right? And Mercury Moon are working together cooperatively. To me, you're looking at least right around the ingress of June 9th, potentially a little window where there could be some really nice cooperation, some allies being found, some innovative ideas coming through in terms of how to see. Moon and Mercury and Cancer and Virgo are going to make things practical and make things grow. Right. So, Venus, it seems like it's going to enter in and be like, hey, I might be able to be of service here and to help try to harmonize things. So I'm thinking of a kind of practical, innovative, harmonious energy that's coming in right away. But I think you're right, which is on was it the Eight of Swords?
Yeah.
Eight of Swords image, like that. The image of that, it's a woman too, and that's important. Is kind of the feminine Venus here. The feminine Venus in Gemini also may go through some of the same challenges, the mental anguish and worrying. How am I going to bring all of this together? Like, how am I going to get it to work? I'm the harmonizer. I've come in and I've got a task to do to harmonize within this T square, this vision that's trying to take place. But I don't know how to do it, or I'm not, so some worry about that. Maybe, again, it's not as big of a deal as we think that it is. But on the other hand, with Mercury being its dispositor for quite a while throughout the month, and Mercury closing in on a conjunction to Mars in opposition to Saturn and Pluto, not all of those fears are going to be unfounded. Right. There could be some real challenges and feeling like you're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place, like surrounded by those swords. I do believe that things are going to get pretty intense in trying to work through some kind of very tricky dilemma or situation that comes in about the middle of the month. Because we've got this T square trying to work itself out. Venus is trying to harmonize. But, like I said, Mercury, it's Venus's ruler in Gemini, is getting into it with Mars and opposing Pluto and Saturn, which is like, kind of like an unstoppable force meets an immovable object. There's a lot kind of emotionally at stake. There's hard decisions. Sometimes you think about Mars and Cancer opposite Saturn and Capricorn, you get this feeling of like, trying to force a reaction or a response through manipulation or through coercion. You also get this idea of stonewalling or refusing to look at something that's really banging on the door, that's emotionally uncomfortable. You get the feeling also of having to cut ties and separate. That's an opposition. Sometimes that means it's you go this way, I go this way. But that's a complicated dynamic, and it's very emotional and potentially very volatile and sort of reactive, and it's disposing of that Venus. That's why I think the other side of that card, where there's like you really are in something of a pickle and you're just not sure how to go through it, I think that could be a part of this as well.
Well, and I don't see things getting resolved right away either, because to me, I've been looking at the dignities of the planets, whether they have power or resource, or if their condition is good. And Venus is Peregrine from the 8th to the 20th, which
right.
means it doesn't have any dignity, whether by it being in its own domicile, its own bounds, its own triplicity. So it's kind of wandering around there without stuff to help it out. So it's going to try to harmonize, but it might not be as effective as it could be when it becomes when it gets dignity on the 20th.
Right. And the other thing is, I mean, one good thing that will mitigate this, of course, is, it is moving through a whole sign opposition to Jupiter all month.
Right.
And I'm a little bit more mixed on Neptune as a malefic or benefic. Very clear that Jupiter will add something benefic to Venus's situation. And Venus-Jupiter oppositions in general are, often, very sort of grand, and they often confer blessings and support. So I think it'll go in a positive direction, but I think you're also right that it's not until later. For me, the real peak moment of the month, and you tell me what you think, Spencer, is you hit June 20th or so, and all of a sudden you've got the oppositions peaking, right? And the summer solstice coming through, and the last T-squares from Venus coming through. I would see that as a kind of cathartic moment. It might be really difficult, but I think the result of it is, and then 2 days later, Venus hits the opposition to Jupiter and square to Neptune, and these things start to fade. I think that's probably the turning point. What do you think?
Yeah, that full moon is going to be a big one.
Full moon on the 17th.
Yeah, and that's going to build to that solstice date.
Let's go. Hold on, let's get to the full moon on here so everyone can.
So wait, go one day forward just for a second, because there's 10th. One point I want to make up with that. So yeah, on the 10th here, you can see that there's an opposition between the Sun and Jupiter that perfects.
Right.
One thing I wanted to point out with that is that Jupiter has a condition right now called curtailed passage. So it basically is invisible on the eastern and western horizon in the morning and the evening, and that was said to really weaken an outer planet like Jupiter, Saturn, or Mars when it's in its curtailed passage. And that's when it's within 7.5 degrees of the opposition on either side. So I think that Jupiter is going to be trying to come and interact, but it's not as empowered as it could be right now. It's a little bit weakened.
Right. And just to explain curtailed passage to everybody, how is that created astronomically? It comes from the opposition to the Sun, and the fact that as the Sun's setting, Jupiter's rising, and so there's this, or vice versa, and so there's this tricky field that it's in where its appearance is curtailed. Do I have that right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I haven't heard that phrase used for a really long time. It's a really nice use of that concept. So this matches, though, with what we're saying about Venus, too, which is like Venus is trying to help, but she's Peregrine for a while. And during this period, this would be part of the period where Venus is also Peregrine, right?
Right, exactly. So she's trying to harmonize, she's not getting the help that she needs, really. It may be like you're trying to eloquently convince somebody of something, because Venus is softening the speech and the way we're communicating, but that person may not be ready to hear you yet. I think that could be one thing, that could manifest. And then you're trying to bring a unified vision, but the vision is sort of hidden right now. The clarity for the vision is kind of behind the scenes. So you may be working agreements out behind the scenes before it comes out and is revealed again.
Well, gosh, I can tell you that that certainly makes sense for a lot of what we're dealing with right now. It's just sort of like, new things that we're getting ready to launch, but really having to work behind the scenes to get it all set up first. That certainly makes sense for some things that I'm personally going through. The other thing that is interesting about this is Sun-Jupiter oppositions in general it's kind of like the way that I think about it for the superior planets is it's a bit like a full moon moment for a superior planet when it's opposite the Sun, because Mars, Saturn, or Jupiter, when they're exactly opposite the Sun. There's again, there's a sort of dynamic tension between the two, and often what does the Sun do? What are the Sun's actions? The Sun clarifies, or the Sun will judge between things, choose something and ignore something else, because the Sun is intimately involved with Saturn as well. It's the planet that rules the sign opposite to Saturn's sign. So the idea of selecting something that's special, that shines, that's unique, what's in the shadow of that selection? The elimination, or what it's marginalized or not selected, and that's Saturn. So whenever there's an opposition from the sun to a planet, oftentimes you have this sense of, I've arrived at something, I've decided upon something, something is standing out, but the oppositional, whatever's being excluded or whatever's been kind of set aside or cast aside, is not, the ramifications of having to judge against something else in favor of something, in other words, isn't immediately seen. And that's another way of thinking about that curtailed space.
Well, and I think we have a clue too, Adam, is to the Cazimi moment of Jupiter when it was in the heart of the sun was considered the beginning of this cycle. Mm-hmm. So if we look at the last time that Jupiter was conjoining the sun, we may be able to ferret out some of the themes that were beginning that are coming to a head with this opposition.
Very good call. Let's go back in time and see if we can find that. So I've got it right here. So you're looking at basically, we'll just do it loosely, about the end of November of last year.
Thanksgiving.
Right, Thanksgiving.
What conversation did you have at the Thanksgiving table?
No, and that's the thing, is that with the Cazimi of those outer traditional outer planets, you know, because I've traced a bunch of these myself, and sometimes the seed of the beginning of one of these cycles is really subtle. So you go back to the Jupiter-Sun conjunction, now it's hitting the opposition. You go back to the start of it, and you're like, well, you know, unless you're proactive about it, it's sometimes very hard to figure out. And that's what also sometimes makes doing like sort of hindsight astrology with clients difficult, is sometimes you can see something really big was starting right around this time, but it was, you know, 15 years ago, and it might have been a little bit more subtle.
I mean, I think you have to practice it like this. I think you have to look at it as part of a greater cycle to really understand the meaning that is present in the current cycle. Seeing it as a whole has really helped me say, oh, well, this is just a phase of this. This is the cocoon phase, or this is the emerging phase. And being able to know what it was related to is really valuable. And, you know, with this moment, it's like, what argument did you get in with Uncle Bob at the dinner table at Thanksgiving? And like, how is that affecting what's going on, you know, at the Memorial Day dinner or something, like on the barbecue? Oh.
Right. That's right. Yeah. So if you could look back to Thanksgiving, in other words, we're saying, and see something of the fruit that's going to come of this sort of Jupiter cycle this month. Okay. So let's see. I think we were at the 10th. Should we go up to the full moon?
Hold on a second.
Anything else in there? You've got such detailed notes.
So I had on the 13th was the beginning of Mercury conjoining Mars. Which was what you have taught us is called Kolesis, which is within 3 degrees, kind of an adherence of those planets together. So you're going to start to see the beginning of this phase come in, because I know that we look at the perfections of these, which means when they become exact, but I think sometimes it's helpful to see when that energy is going to start fermenting. And to know that, oh, okay, this is the beginning of this, and it's going to peak here, and then it's going to start to fade. So on the 13th, Mercury is just beginning its conjunction with Mars. So you have to be real careful that day on how you communicate with people. And that to me seems like a ripe for temper tantrums.
Right.
You know, like watch out with your two little ones, you know.
Right.
So that there might be an explosive pouting attack that happens.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, the 3-degree rule is sometimes what we call it. It's like, you know, when a planet moves to within 3 degrees of making an aspect in ancient astrology, it was considered very active. And in the part where it's applying, it's like the pressure's building. The exact conjunction is usually thought of as or the exact aspect or conjunction is thought of as an event of some kind, and then the fallout might be the 3 degrees after might also represent a flowing forth where something is continuing to blossom or fall out. You can think of it a bit like 2 examples that I've heard. One is hair. This is, I think Robert Schmidt used this example. Hair, the hair that's growing and that then kind of flows out, and you get a nice dew, and then it falls out. Right. So or fruit on a tree, you know, where it grows, it gets ripe, heavy, and then it falls off. The falling off part is usually right after the exact moment when it's sort of reaching the blossom of the exact aspect. But the buildup, as it's developing, that's when the tensions are mounting creatively, or whatever. You're starting to send each other the evil eye in your household before the big blow up, you know.
Well, and that's a perfect way to describe it, because the ancients describe some of these more difficult aspects with malefics as quote unquote the evil eye, and because aspect means to look at, right? And we can't skip over June 14th, because that's the perfection of Mars and Saturn's opposition.
Right.
That's when the rubber hits the road, and we have a standoff. I mean, to me, some of the notes I made about a standoff regarding family life versus public life and responsibilities out in the world. Mars is also going to be near the North Node, increasing the passive aggression that it's putting out into the world.
That's right. This is a hungry, kind of pissed off Mars,
Yeah.
which could, on the positive side, I think this Mars, when it's in the moon sign, has the potential to be, Mars isn't just wanting to mess stuff up. Mars also wants to protect, defend, advocate, show some courage or, sort of valiancy or something like that. But I think, so sticking up for, defending, or sort of being an advocate for something lunar, could also be a part of this. Like I said, kind of a mama bear energy.
Well, and I think the key is not getting too irrational about it. Like, I think Mars in Cancer can bring an emotionality to it that where you get, it's going to run headlong into Saturn, the king of objectivity and distance. And to me, that's kind of like one of the comparisons I had here was, when you've got a child that just is throwing a temper tantrum and wants to run out in the middle of the road, and Saturn, the parents, like grabs him by the collar and nope, you're not going to go right out in the middle of the road.
Right.
Or like, I think one of your former students, Elodie, posted these amazing pictures of children throwing temper tantrums. And there was all these crazy quotes of like, was told he had to peel his own banana or something, or like
he's just totally melting down.
Just melting down over the most ridiculous things.
I laughed so hard when I saw that. I showed my wife that post because, that's what it's like as a parent sometime of little ones, as you know very well, and I'm getting to know. Sometimes it's like, like I think one of them was like, couldn't put dirty diaper on head as hat, and it shows the girl just like completely like it might as well look like an exorcism, like just so pissed off, so distraught. So I mean that kind of like that's possible. However, I think that's the volatility, and then the growing up of Saturn saying, like, hey, let's be objective about this. Let's sit down and grow up.
Well, and be more direct too, right?
More direct.
Yeah, because there's an indirectness to Mars and Cancer where you're going to go around the back channels, the backbiting, the pouting, the
gossip.
The gossip, exactly. Yeah. So I think it's important to watch that during this standoff, so to speak.
Yeah, and the other thing is, I think that Mars opposite Saturn is with Pluto.
Right.
And so the dark side of Saturn, the kind of subterranean, power-hungry Saturn, that part of it is also like the people who won't listen, like the people who are like, I'm thinking about powerful, men in the government, or, people who have a lot of power, and they say that there's someone's knocking at the door of the castle, at the castle gate saying, there's people dying in the streets here, King. You got to open up the reserves and feed some people. And the king is sitting there like a hoarder, greedy and like a dragon with the Pluto in there, and saying like, no, like I'm not going to listen to you. I don't have to. It's not necessary for me to listen to you. You're just a complainer. And but then what happens is, someone starts throwing some tomatoes. Someone starts, or maybe worse, they start scaling the walls, or they come in with some of those boiling cauldrons or something.
I'm imagining one of those gorillas at the zoo, like flinging feces at the.
That's right. That's right. Like things are gonna actually like there will be a reckoning if someone is trying to use their power to stonewall someone that is making an emotional demand, or an emotional is presenting something emotionally that's true, that's like not being heard.
And here's a question for you. which planet would have the upper hand? I mean, are we saying that Saturn may actually have the upper hand due to its being, in its own domicile? So,
Well, it really depends on, I mean, like, let's be very specific when this is just like, let's go to June, right when the first oppositions are happening, which comes through right about where? Let's see. Okay, we're going to have the first opposition is what, like the 13th, right around there. Do I have that right? 13th to 14th. It's
Yep.
starting Mars opposing Saturn exactly.
That week's going to be hard.
You know what?
Yeah.
Mars and the moon are in mutual reception in Scorpio during that opposition.
Mm-hmm.
So you could think about that, considering the, I think that could be a little bit more constructive confrontation, or some degree of like, some kind of underdog moon Mars energy kind of helping itself. I mean, it feels like it's powering up because it's almost a full moon by that time too. Right. But then when you go forward from there, so I could see parts of this favoring the moon Mars, but then when you go forward and you get into the full moon, then I think, and you're getting into the opposition to Pluto, moon's going to go through Sagittarius, and then it's going to get into Capricorn. Right. And once it gets into Capricorn, then I think Saturn and Pluto really have the upper hand, because moon's debilitated and in the kingdom of Saturn and Pluto, and right around the full moon, right after the full moon. And I think that part of this where it's opposing Pluto is where it's going to be nastier.
Well, and you could see too with Mars and the moon both in their falls or their depressions, it's like they're at the bottom of the well trying to call out, right?
Right.
And Saturn is sitting on the throne. So
that's right.
There's definitely a power dynamic that isn't fair.
And right. There's some degree of like, it's not a fair fight.
Right. Exactly. So to me, that speaks to the playing out of the current events we've been seeing, and the establishment, maybe cracking back on the cries for change and for whatnot. Kind of the Empire Strikes Back type of thing. I don't think those issues are going away anytime soon, and nor should they. There's some important, stuff going on that we need to acknowledge.
Well, let's, just out of curiosity, let's go back in time to the last time that Mars was in Cancer with Pluto and Capricorn, because I always like to do that. Let's see here. And this is a fun thing. I'll teach people this just, okay, here we go. So, all right. So this would have perfected right in like July of 2017.
But you got Saturn and Sag though.
No, right. Different dynamic, but let's just, in terms of like a Mars-Pluto conjunction, Pluto, right?
Pluto. Okay. Gotcha.
Mars-Pluto opposition, yeah. Excuse me. Okay. So, all right, so here's what I like to do. I like to go to the Wikipedia articles for 2017, or whatever year we're doing, right? And look at what was happening right around that time. So so we'll go back and see which date. Can you see the chart on the screen right now?
Yeah, I can. And I'm thinking I had a very intense personal experience around that time.
Okay.
That I don't super want to go into, but it was a standoff related to it was a family standoff that was very intense. Right.
Okay, you had that personally happening.
Yeah, it was a power dynamic that was being put forth.
Here's what's... Go ahead, keep going.
Just a power of wills, and there was a dark element that had bubbled up that we ran headlong into, basically, and had to take intense action to reconcile. Okay, got it. Yeah. During that time for me, I almost cut off my finger. Ooh. I almost cut off my finger. I got stung by a hornet 7 times. And I ended up spilling boiling water on myself. Oh no. Just so that people know. I mean, that was, for me, that was right on my moon. Ended up engaging my moon too. But at any rate, okay, so this is late June, or building up in June of 2017. And we'll just show you some of the things that happened. In terms of like some of the similarities are going to be there. You have the House of Representatives Majority Whip Steve Scalise and his aides hit by gunfire during a baseball practice. You remember that? Yeah. Right? Yeah. You had
announcement that Conor McGregor and Floyd Mayweather would fight, which is very Mars Pluto. You also had it announced that Robert Mueller was investigating Trump for obstruction of justice. You had a shooting at a UPS facility that it was in San Francisco. You had a young woman, Michelle Carter, who was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter for encouraging her boyfriend to take his own life. She had sent these text messages encouraging him to take his own life.
Wow.
Geronimo Yanez, I think that's how you say it, was acquitted of all charges and found to be not guilty in the case of the shooting of Philando Castile.
One little side note with that Mueller thing. So Neptune is at 14 degrees Pisces here. I had a note in here that on January 12th of this past year, Jupiter squared Neptune at 14 degrees, and it came out in the news that there was, that Mueller was going to a different phase of the investigation or something like that. I can't really remember the exact details of it, but it was a big New York Times story on January 12th.
Right as it was perfecting.
Right as that was perfecting. It's funny because it was returning to the same degree that when this was coming out. So,
right, and we just had another big development in that case where he gave this public statement, and it was sort of really mercurial and hard to read. And at any rate, the Philando Castile was I'm from Minnesota, so the shooting of the young African-American man, if I remember correctly, and he was, or maybe was he Latino? I can't remember. But at any rate, he was killed by an officer, and it was on video. Like it was spread virally. So it was this really, and it was, one of the things that comes up between Cancer and Capricorn is often race relations in general. Right. You got that lunar background, and the moon is so important to things like race and ethnicity and things like that.
You've got a clannishism happening with Cancer.
That's right. That's right.
Versus your team, my kin versus your kin type of thing.
Yep.
Was that the guy that was in the backseat of his car and his girlfriend was filming it?
He had apparently, like, I think he had a gun in his car, and he wasn't reaching for it. I don't believe. I think he was just like reaching for his papers or something, right. And he had a permit for the gun and everything, if I remember. I don't remember the details, honestly, but at any rate, it was definitely like a wrongful shooting.
Yeah.
And he like died in the front seat, and it was like all on video.
Right.
But then you had the story of an American student that had been detained in North Korea that died after being released. And then you also had this really severe heat wave that caused 40 American Airlines planes to be grounded, which is also really interesting. Just when you get to that kind of, even though Mars is in a water sign, you really feel the Mars in Cancer as boiling. Especially in opposition to Pluto, the potential for things boiling. That's why I got, right at that last one, I literally dumped boiling water on myself. So just this idea of, extreme sort of tensions and heat. And
well, you have to be careful and be aware of that too, because you can become like the frog in the pot. You don't know that you're about to die until it's already too late, because it can be gradual too.
That's right. So I'm not trying to bring us back to the news is pretty much all the horrible stuff, right? So, but just to give people a feeling for like, where were you in late June, early July of 2017? Because that's the last time that Mars opposed Pluto. And sometimes going back to that, just remembering what that was like, it's good because if you were in a more emotionally volatile space, like, better to recall that so that you can, be a little bit more proactive this time.
Just getting distance from those events will, allow you to make a better choice in the moment the next time. I think that when we talk about the fate or free will thing, you may not be able to choose all the events that happen, but, you can kind of adjust your perspective and your immediate reaction, I think, a lot of the time. I think that's kind of where I fall on that,
Right. Let's look at I'm conscious of time. So let's look at, we have the full moon on June 17th.
Well, before that, you had Jupiter squaring Neptune perfecting on the 16th.
On the 16th, right.
And the moon is activating Jupiter in Sagittarius. Mercury sextile, adding in a little bit of a intermediary between them, a little bit of testimony. to kind of buffer that energy. I don't, Jupiter Neptune isn't always terrible though. I think that's the thing. Anytime we've got the benefics involved with something, there could be, positive things associated.
Right, like taking lots of heroin.
Yeah, I guess so. Too much of a good thing, right?
No, you're right though. It is like Jupiter's square to Neptune is sort of like you've got, well, I think of like the imaginative richness of these landscapes like Avatar or The Matrix or Star Wars and other things that were either being made and filmed under Jupiter Neptune hard aspects or that were released under Jupiter Neptune hard aspects, because the desire for transcendence and getting away from the mundane and the boring. I mean, Neptune is constantly trying to get away from anything that feels really just limiting, but not so much in a physical sense as much as in an imaginative, mental, or emotional sense. And so Jupiter in Sagittarius is going to expand, just make that bigger, make that desire bigger. So one of the other things that I'm thinking about is just in terms of the well, if you think about the idealism that could be coming through this month, I think that's sort of the silver lining, is that like this, you think of Jupiter, Neptune, you think of things like miracles, faith. Like, okay, let me tell you this experience. I'm not kidding you either. Mm-hmm. So my father has sleep apnea. Do you know what that is?
Yeah.
Okay, so
he snores a lot.
Yeah, well, and he has to have a breathing machine, and he sleeps now. And I have occasionally had instances of sleep apnea. I don't snore, but when I'm laying on my back, occasionally, like I'll wake up kind of like I have to because I don't know how that works exactly, but it's basically like you stop breathing a little bit and your body just kind of like takes a gasp. Mm-hmm. So I've had that since I was like, I don't know, I don't even know, probably like high school. And I've always just slept on my side for the most part because it's kind of annoying. And so at any rate, and again, it comes and goes. Like there's long stretches of my life, where it'll be totally fine. So as Jupiter is basically perfecting its square to Neptune right now, right, in my Jupiter's in my 8th house, right, of death. Mm-hmm. I had an experience a couple nights ago where I had one of those moments where like, you kind of, my body's like needs to take a breath while I'm sleeping. And oftentimes it'll like wake me up when that happens.
Yeah.
And again, I'm saying this now because there's always like 30 people who are like, let me just offer you tons of free medical advice. I'm like a healer level 10. I'll just tell you exactly what's wrong with you. No, thank you. I appreciate your concern, but no, thank you.
You live with an herbalist. She's got you covered, right?
You're fine. So it's okay. But the Jupiter in my 8th house, right? So, and this is as well, I won't go into it. So at any rate, well, I will say this, Pluto's opposing my sun right now as well. So I've been thinking a lot about death. Yeah. And I had one of these moments, right? But in the moment I was dreaming and I had a lucid sort of out of body experience of the moment where my body needed to take a breath, but for a couple of seconds, like wasn't.
Right.
And it was really profound. Like, and I 10 years of working with ayahuasca in the Amazon and elsewhere. And I've had a lot of, pretty, I would say like profound visionary experiences, but this was very profound. And it felt like I really got this vision of what the subtle body is.
You got a glimpse behind the veil.
Yeah, it was very brief. It was a couple of seconds at most before I took a breath and then kind of like woke up. But I was standing in the corner of my room looking at my own body.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was, I'm telling you, like, and I speak with a Jungian regularly, and I definitely have that on my list to talk with him about next time I meet with him, because, it wasn't just, I don't know if you'd call it a near-death experience or not, but it felt miraculous. Mm-hmm. And I don't have those kinds of experiences, sober a lot. Like I consider myself a pretty intuitive person. I get that kind of into that flow state when I write or whatever, but I'm not like a lot of people are walking around just like flowing with Kundalini and like all, they've got all this stuff going on.
Have you ever had sleep paralysis? That's some scary stuff right there.
I have had that before.
Yeah.
Yeah, a long time ago, but yeah, I have had that before.
Yeah, I mean, I can picture Goya's Nightmare, that painting with like the demons sitting on your chest and like the crazy,
Yeah.
horse with his eyes all weird. Like,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
what it feels like.
Everyone is like, we're like, well, this really took a dark turn once we started talking about Mars and Pluto.
So I have one little short anecdote about Jupiter, Neptune.
Yeah, because this is my point. We'll just put a little
Yeah.
bow around this first. My point was that it felt very miraculous. And so I think that there is this sort of silver lining in the astrology this month, which is like, some pretty miraculous, uplifting, redeeming kinds of things can happen. That's quality, standard Jupiter Neptune stuff.
Perfect segue to this story. Perfect. So like on the 12th, January 12th, which is the last time that this aspect perfected at 14 degrees, I had my daughter had a swim meet, right? And it was her first, it was a USA swim meet, which is like an extra level of competition that kids go to where there are future Olympians at the pool, getting times for Junior Olympics and stuff like that. And when we went to the pool, it was like, this kind of big moment kind of thing. There was a bald eagle that was right outside the school where the pool was, and it was sitting right in the tree, just sitting right in front of the door. And it stayed there for the entire 4 hours we were at that swim meet. And then as we were leaving, as we're pulling away in the car, it was like flying alongside of us, like alongside the window. And I'm like, and in my mind, I'm like, yeah, my daughter's going to be in the Olympics.
That's right.
That's right. So you can see that you can take it like the vision to like these like preposterous proportions. Not saying she couldn't be an Olympian, but she's new at it and a little bit of a late bloomer. So, I have to temper expectations and things like that. But you can see that you're just like the vision. Oh my God,
If everything goes really well, you'll have developed like a really elaborate version of astrological role-playing game, and your daughter will be in the Olympics.
There you go.
Like that's where the end of the month is going.
Yeah, there you go.
You said it was an eagle?
It was in bald eagle.
It was a bald eagle. Okay, that's also
Michigan. Yeah, there's bald eagles here.
And that's the bird of Zeus.
Oh, there you go. Perfect.
That's Jupiter's. That's like Jupiter's bird. So,
see?
Yeah,
he was with us that day.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's really impressive, and especially like I love the connection to Neptune and the pool, right? There's like
the ocean.
Yeah. Well, make sure those kids aren't on steroids.
So I don't know. Some of them look pretty like they could be. I remember there was a scandal with the Chinese women's Olympic team where they were doing like blood doping and stuff like that back in the 80s. So it happens,
Yeah, totally. I mean,
on that note,
everyone just go to the co-op and just get a power bar, guys.
Right. Go take some. You know what it was in the 80s? It was like this medicinal mushroom that they were taking. Cordyceps, the little like mushrooms that grow out of like ants and stuff. Like they're parasites for insects.
Oh, weird.
They give you like extra stamina. Like so. I don't know. Interesting stuff.
Yeah. Let's see here. We've done pretty good with the full. I want to try to wrap things up pretty quick here.
Yeah.
So we've got the full moon coming through on June 17th. That's activating the T-square again. More of the same, but anything else you want to add to that one?
Yeah, I wanted to just read an excerpt from this book that I really am enjoying. 36 Faces, Mr. Austin Coppock, very brilliant author. And he talks about with Gemini 2. I'm sorry.
Well, let's put this in context. So the 36 faces are the 36 decanic portions of the zodiac, which are segments of 10 degrees each. So every sign has 3 segments of 10 degrees each. And these segments of the zodiac traditionally were associated with basically Egyptian magic, a kind of horoscopic astrology concept it's thought to come from Egypt. And these decans would also be assigned to different portions of constellations, and they had different kinds of alchemical meanings and images associated with them, and also now often are associated with different tarot cards. So this book, 36 Faces, was written by Austin, who's a really awesome astrologer and he wrote this, I don't know, I forget, it was like 4 or 5 years ago. I've had him as a guest speaker in my program several times. He also gave a talk one time on the fixed stars. It was really nice.
Well, and he was at Norwalk with you recently too,
Yeah,
right?
yep, yep. We're at Norwalk.
But he has a story of the myth of the twins. And the third decan of Gemini, which he dubs the executioner's sword, is about what we were talking about earlier, about making a choice. And he says, quote, "This decan brings the myth of the twins to an end by terminating one of them. In the Greek myth, the divine twins are the Dioscuri, Castor and Polydeuces. After many adventures, Castor is slain, leaving the semi-divine Polydeuces to mourn his mortal brother's death. After his beloved sibling's death, Polydeuces offers to share his immortality with his brother, and the gods accept. Therefore, thereafter, Polydeuces and Castor alternate days in Hades and Olympus. It is only after the death of one brother that they are truly equal. The polarity has been mitigated and a dynamic unity achieved."
Yeah, yeah, that's amazing, and it's so much a part of the Gemini symbolism in general, with the the matrix of the twins obviously being a huge part of a full moon in Sagittarius, going back and forth from Gemini to Sag, and I could say more about that myth in general in relationship to Gemini, with Mars and Gemini in my own chart, and my best friend growing up was a Gemini. So at any rate.
Well, and that you're having this opposition to the moon that is activating that Jupiter. And, with the moon being in the third decan again of Sagittarius, you have to eliminate some options because the burden may become too heavy to carry, the burden of that third decan of Sagittarius there. So I think that you find freedom, though, through choice, from creating a limit or a boundary, and recognizing that even refusing to choose is a choice.
That's right. That's right.
Suffering.
Yeah. Yeah,
and
totally.
You also see Venus co-present with the sun and the moon co-present with Jupiter. So they're sitting at each other's table with the benefics. So I think there's potential for this to be positive because you've got the two benefics there co-present with this full moon. But you got to choose. You got to commit. And that's, there's a kind of a weeding out that needs to happen. Right.
Speaking of weeding out, someone is cutting my lawn right now. So we have I normally would cut my own lawn. We have an acre.
Oh, yeah.
And so I ended up hiring someone because I'm just like, with 2 kids and an acre, it takes like 3 hours. So
you're allowed to delegate every once in a while.
I am like Capricorn moon, and it's like the other day I was doing a video from Norwalk, and I had ordered room service, and it came to the door, and I was like so embarrassed to admit that I'd ordered room service too. Anyway,
right.
So
one last note on that is Mercury is going to be in its own bounds by this time, so it's going to be able to set the agenda, and then Jupiter is going to be in its own triplicity. Which, according to Demetra George, gives communal support. And you've talked about it as having the wind at your back, so to speak. So I think you've got one part of this full moon setting the agenda, and the other one having, some support to move forward. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, it's complicated hugely by the conjunction to Mars, obviously, and the opposition to Saturn. So it's one thing that I'm a little bit worried about is that you're going to have it moving into malefic enclosure, right?
Yeah.
So you're going to have it sort of sandwiched between 18 Cancer and 20 Cancer. In that range, it's between the rays of Saturn and Mars.
That's yucky.
So I can't remember offhand if Mercury's in its term at that point. Is it? I don't have the terms memorized, obviously.
It's in its own bound. Yep.
Yeah, so that'll help. That does help. It gives it some strength, but that enclosure I think is going to be pretty intense for Mercury. I think that's the time when the mental pressure cooker could really be on. That's why I said this point from the month, like full moon, and then when the moon's going to move into Capricorn, also disposing of Mercury and Mars.
Right.
I think from full moon through winter or summer solstice, that's the point where things are going to be, the dynamic tension is going to be great, maybe transformative, healing, productive, but I think.
Well, Venus goes under the beams again and makes its evening set.
Right. So Venus is kind of going into the underworld, like the goddess of harmony is
Right.
sinking. Her
Right.
disposer or Mercury is caught in between the malefics. Like it
Morning.
has a feeling like it could also in the collective, I could see it as some kind of major hit for the progress of women,
Sure.
unfortunately, or some kind of high profile event or issues related to women. But at any rate,
And
I
Mercury is entering the shadow of its retrograde on the 20th too, at 23 Cancer. So we're gonna, probably
be revisiting this, and especially
yeah.
with eclipse season coming through these
Yeah.
signs in July as well.
So I would say don't give up hope if it looks like that, because it will be revisited on some level,
That's
right?
right. And the other thing is, of course, that the sun entering Cancer at the summer solstice, that, 20, get into the 21st, 22nd, right around there, the sun coming in is, it's like the that's going to bring some really good energy, and should bring some clarification and just bring light into the fold, so to speak. And also, the other thing that's important to remember is that Mars is you know, Mars is growing old right now. So, you later in the summer, the other thing that's going to happen if you kind of speed this up, right, is you're going to see as the summer goes on that gradually the sun is going to start moving to catch Mars in a conjunction and starting a new cycle. So this isn't a Mars that's like aging. If you think about that in the context of what's going on this month of June, especially from like full moon to summer solstice, you're also thinking like, okay, now the sun is entering the same sign as Mars, and Mars is starting to weaken. There's so you also get the feeling of, if the trouble is coming from Mars, that this is a Mars that might be also reflect something that's ready to end. That's ready, and that could be some part of us that is maybe making a really intense demand on ourselves or on others or our environment or someone in our environment. But their reign of terror may also be coming to an end, and that's another way of thinking about it, with Mars kind of growing old right now.
Hallelujah.
Right. So let's see. I want to go to the only other thing that I really have on my list, because we really do need to close shop now, is when you get to the 23rd and 24th, you have Venus making the T-square. We had started talking about this. You can kind of see Venus coming through right around the 22nd, 23rd, 24th, right in that range. Mars has passed the oppositions at this point, which is nice. And I'm feeling like this, like I said, Sun is entering Cancer, which I think will be relieving. And Mercury will change signs too into Leo, and get out of the kind of conjunction with Mars. I think that this has the power to be a clarifying, redeeming, harmonizing, kind of uplifting way of moving towards the end of the month. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be echoing the themes that we've been going through, but it's giving a different flavor, right? It's offering up a unification rather than a separation type of experience. There's Venus, basically Aphrodite wants to connect things and wants to become she wants things to come to her. So like you made a really great video about this, about the receptive nature of it. So I think that there's maybe less pushing that would happen around this time and more of an openness with this particular one than maybe we've seen with the agenda of the other planets moving through that T-square.
Yeah, that's right. I'm kind of muting as we go because I'm not sure how loud the lawnmower is. Can you hear it at all?
Nah, it's just a mild hum.
Okay,
It's
good.
okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly it, is that you got two benefics in an opposition, and that, is usually a good thing. It can be a little indulgent or excessive,
Yeah.
but I think this is a harmonizing moment that comes out of the struggles of the month. And so I have it circled as like there might be some tearing down, but I think that the tearing down is constructive. It's like that fight that you need to have with a close friend or a family member, or a conversation that's not easy, or it's like, breaking up with someone, and as soon as you actually move out and get into your own space, it's like, oh, it was so much harder to break up because we were still living together, that kind of thing. Those feelings of like needing to make some hard choices, maybe some hard separations occur, but things start mending and finding harmony again.
Well, Venus gains dignity at this point too. She's in her own terms, in her own bounds, so she's able to more set the agenda, right, for what's going on. Where, you know, so she's able to, she's more empowered by this time when it perfects. And your another book that I found from your videos was that Ren Butler book, Archetypal. What was it? You got it there somewhere.
Archetypal Universe?
The Archetypal Universe. I mean, he talks about the combination with this is grand happiness, positive, supportive relationships, expansive beauty, but also habitual laziness or conspicuous consumption. So there's, you know, Aphrodite is being lushly adorned. But I guess there's a risk of overspending or of like overdoing it with that. And that's just the flip side of the reconciliation, you know, like, you know, say you had an argument with your family or your spouse, you don't necessarily need to book the, you know, 10-day vacation to the Bahamas to like work it out, you know, like you don't need to go like overboard with it.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Don't come up with $1 million solution to a $10 problem.
Yes. Perfect.
Yeah. There's something, the other thing that I would mention with this is like, well, for example, I took my daughter to Disney World, like last year. We had a wedding that was there for a friend of ours. So we went to Disney World, and I have to say Venus was opposite Jupiter during that time.
Yeah.
And it was magical and excessive happiness. You know, like it was Disney World, and was
it the happiest place on earth?
It was the happiest place on earth. Like, yeah. So if I won the Super Bowl, that's where I would want to go. Right. But no, let me just say this, which is that it was also there was a seduction in it. Right. You know what I mean? Like, this happiness will last forever, so long as I just like
spend $4,000.
Yeah, exactly. And it was, you know, so there's a high price sometimes around Venus Jupiter too. So maybe pay a little attention to that.
How many gift shops did you have to be paraded through?
Right, exactly.
So the underbelly of capitalism.
That's right.
Is probably insane.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
You can also see on this chart here that the moon is activating Neptune on that. On that,
yeah, right.
So the Neptune aspect of this is going to be really prominent. So the you know, possibility to fall into the illusion and the fantasy is really prominent, I think. The good thing I thought with this, there is some good news, is Saturn's making a sextile to this and probably assisting with a little bit of a sobering influence with this T-square. You know, it's not strong because the sextile is a little weaker, but at least it's some practical voice in the room, right?
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, I think, I'm going to shut my window. Hold on just a second.
Sure.
I don't know if other people could hear it or not, but I can, so it's hard for me to concentrate.
Sure.
Say the last thing that you just said one more time.
Yeah, so Saturn being sextiled to Neptune is bringing a little bit of a sobering influence to this like magical illusion. And it's nice that that voice is in the room, because if we think of these planetary placements as deities giving testimony, Saturn's going to be the one that's kind of off to the side while all this flowery talk is happening, saying, well, yeah, but
right.
Like, right. So that's like you call your accountant after your Disney World trip and you're like, yeah, can I really afford to stay for an extra 3 days and go to Epcot or whatever? And your accountant's like, I don't know, Adam, you should bring the girls home, I think, your account.
My accountant is also my wife. So.
Well, there you go. She was playing that role.
Right? Right. We do it together, but yeah. So, that's a really good point. Well, so tempered enthusiasm about the end of the month, but I think compared to that log jam of intensity around the full moon and through the summer solstice,
should be nice.
Yeah. Now, if you've listened to all of this, everybody, and you've been able to extract something about what's going to happen in June, then good. I think we've given you a lot to chew on. We've gone through a lot of different ways of thinking about the transits. here's one thing that I'll tell people, because sometimes you listen to a show like this and there's so many things that are said, you get overwhelmed. You're like, well, you know, what are the big takeaways here? And I think, first of all, one of the, when we describe all the different layers of the weather as astrologers, you letting that wash over you, it's not so much preparing yourself to say, well, this is exactly what's going to happen, as much as it is kind of putting yourself in the position where you can, when things do start happening, you will start recalling things from your forecasts that you hear from the astrologers that you love. That's how astrology tends to work. More than it is prognosticative, it is a reflective tool, which means, you're going to remember one of the tarot cards we talked about. You're going to remember some of the elements of the Mars opposition that we talked about, or whatever. And it's really putting this in as like a spiritual part of your diet, so to speak, prepares you to be reflective upon your experiences as they're coming up, because they're going to surprise you no matter what we say. Because, I've done this for, a long, long time now. And every month, every astrology forecast that I do, even though I have some sense of what's going to happen, it's always still surprising. So astrology is really not about preparing you for exactly what's going to happen, as much as it is about trying to help you work through it and giving you that reflective, kind of, so you're going to bring this conversation with us two Cancer guys, you'll bring that into your month ahead, and hopefully some good things will come out of it.
We're trying to nurture. So
that's right. That's right.
We hope for growth and for, sometimes it's tough love. And I think that's something you have to realize too. Don't ever discount Cancer as being super mushy if there's something going on where they feel protective of people. Because I'll tell you, there's definitely, like you said, Adam, the mother bear can rear its head. And, it's okay to like face things in, difficult circumstances. You'll survive. Like, I think for the most part, like,
right.
Hopefully maybe you'll have a few battle scars or whatnot, but there hopefully will be another day. And you'll look back on it and say, wow, that was probably some of the most instructive times that I've lived. And you'll have gained in character from it. And that's really the key, I think.
Right. Yeah. So let's end with a few big takeaways from this month. I'm going to give my top three. I'll give my top three takeaways to close us. Why don't you start us? What are your top three takeaways this month?
Well, you've got all those planets going through the T-square with Jupiter and Neptune. So there's new ideas coming out to the fore, and trying to parse through which ones are worth acting upon and which ones need to just be discarded. And don't be afraid to only choose the ones that you really feel a connection with. I think that if there's too many things going on, what makes your heart sing, and what can you realistically manifest into the world of form? Because you might really hurt yourself and overwhelm yourself with anxiety if you try to do too many things. So that's the first thing.
First month, good.
Second thing, you've got the new moon and the full moon, and that's going to be kind of the cycle of initiating some of these things and then having them come to fruition. And then with the Mars Saturn thing, there may be some challenging stuff, but I want to give a quick metaphor about that. And I don't know which I Ching this is, but there's an I Ching that talks about when water meets an obstacle, it pools and it eventually spills around it. And I think that the way is not to, bang your head against the wall. It's to pool and wait and be calm and then spill around it in this kind of relaxed and natural way rather than forcing it. And I think that's really the essence of that Mars-Saturn opposition.
Well said by someone who is a Cancer with the moon in Taurus, right?
That's right.
And I'm a Cancer with Taurus rising. So I think that's good. It's good advice for a month in which a lot of Capricorn and Cancer are featured.
And come to the Great Lakes Astrology Conference.
Yes, that's right. Great Lakes Astrology Conference at the end of June. We'll both be there hanging out. Yeah. That's in Michigan. Where can they find that, by the way? What website?
GreatLakesAstrology.com. Got a lot of great speakers. Adam's going to be speaking and doing a couple lectures.
So is Spencer.
There's going to be, Ann Ortley, Gary Caton, Sam Reynolds, Gemini Brett, a lot of wonderful speakers. I know I'm forgetting a ton, but I think we're going to have a good time. And Ann Arbor is really beautiful at that time of the year. And I think we're going to have a nice get together. It's very, very homey. It'll be a nice Cancerian time, you know.
Right. So there you go. You can see Great Lakes Astrology Conference right there.
Perfect.
So let's see, what are my takeaways? My top three are, first of all, with the T-squares, I'm right there with Spencer. I think this month has the potential to be weirdly stressful considering how exciting things might be right now. Like being on the precipice of a new vision, a new dream, a new breakthrough, a new imaginative dimension that's opening up, but feeling like there's a lot of weight around it and a lot of hard choices that are going to come up. So that's my first one. My second one is the Mars-Pluto opposition as an emotional, transformative, cathartic experience that may put you in touch with fears, but they may be good, maybe some emotional maturing that happens, and also, you know, having to, if there's any part of us that's trying to stonewall and not look at something that's demanding our attention, I think we're not going to be able to do that this month. And this month, finally, third for me is this month is foreshadowing for next month's eclipses, so the deeper emotional territory, the kinds of attachments that we have, and maybe some are healthy, some are unhealthy, and also issues around family, home, the past. I think those things in the Mars-Pluto opposition this month, they may be kind of acute, and they're also pointing to deeper changes ahead with the eclipses next month, which we'll talk about. And Spencer, this was really fun. I think we should do it again next month.
This was great. Thanks, Adam, for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, totally. Well, and where can everybody find you, Spencer, just so that they know how to get in touch with you as well?
Yeah, I have a website, spencermichaud.com. I'm also on Instagram at Spencer Michaud. Twitter is the same thing, and Facebook. So yeah, you can find me on all the regular channels, but I use my name. And I have a YouTube channel, Spencer Michaud Astrology. So yeah, there you go. There it is. And I'm open for readings and things like that as well. So
awesome.
This is fun, man. Thank you.
Yeah, this was great. I'll plug one last thing, which is that I have a new course starting on June 9th. Let me pull it up here so you can see it. It's called Ancient Astrology for Modern Times. Spencer's taken my program. He's an avid student of lots of different things, but he's been in my program and talked about it. You can go check out a previous interview that we did it together. It starts on June 9th. There's an early bird rate that's still in effect. Today is the last day you can get it. You can check this out at nightlightastrology.com under the certification course tab. So I'd love to study with some of you. And month of June should be interesting. So thank you everybody for listening, and let us know how the month goes, and we'll see you again for July. Take care, everyone.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.